Chapter 1. Prologue. Amelia Clark. I sat still twinging my fingers together nervously as I waited anxiously for my interview with Mrs. Gray. I don't know much about her other than she's the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company called the Gray's Enterprise, which was previously controlled by her son, Damian Gray. Currently, no one has heard or seen him after he had been reported to have been involved in an accident 2 years ago. Anyway, recently an ad was placed by the Grays for a job interview with no description of the job whatsoever. It could be entering a trap for all I know. I took my eyes around to see an estimate of 3 girls sitting quietly at the corner of the room, waiting. I hope it doesn't turn out to be for one those porn adverts or worse, because I really need the money. Mrs. Gray will see you now. The receptionist spoke up, breaking me out of my thoughts. I looked up at her very chiseled face and smiled regardless. I took in a slow deep breath and gathered myself up before deciding to go in. This shouldn't be so hard, I thought. I placed my hand over my mouth in shock as I made it further into the room. Her office was enormous, like nothing I had ever seen before. Sure, I have seen a lot of cool offices before, but none could compare. Her desk was at the far end of the wide room, so she couldn't see me make a complete fool of myself. I took a deep breath and made my long-ending walk towards her. Her cold, piercing eyes scanned me in silence as I stopped in front of her desk, making me question my choice of clothing. I knew should have gone with the black dress. Sit, she ordered, her voice breaking the silence. I nodded and took a seat. Let's begin, she said, clearly not wanting to waste any more of her expensive time. Your profile says you are an English Lit major, she asked, reaching for a blue folder. Yes. She took a few seconds reviewing the folder, which I am assuming is my profile. Is Lucy in your mother? She asked suddenly, and I stared at her puzzled. How does she know my mother's name? I'm sure that's not in my profile. Yes. I managed to gasp anyway. There was a pause as she quietly studied me. Have you by any chance met my son, Damian? She asked again. I shook my head, not sure why she was asking me all this strange questions. I'm just here for the job, ma'am. I chirped in quietly. She got up from her chair and walked towards her office window pane and stared out for a few seconds before speaking up. Damon was involved in an accident 2 years ago. He hasn't been out in the spotlight since then. She paused for a bit. It's no surprise that half of the world already assumes he's dead. She turned her stormy eyes back to me. Damon is my only son, and without him there won't be anyone left behind to carry on the Gray name and legacy. I nodded, understanding. That's really sad, I thought, though not sure why she's telling me. Do you know where I am getting at, Miss Clark? She asked, moving slowly towards me. Have I by any chance mentioned how intimidating she looks? I shook my head. No, ma'am. I want you to be my son's surrogate, she said bluntly, hitting the nail right on the head. I nearly fell out off my chair, but I managed to retain my composure. You want me to have your son's baby? I repeated, hoping I heard wrong. Yes. She walked back to her desk, and of course you'd be paid splendidly for it. She leaned her back against her chair, watching me. I'm informed you're having money problems. How much? A voice spoke up. It took me a second before I realized the voice was coming from me. $500,000 and double the price if it's a boy, she said, and my eyes widened in shock. How much money could they possibly have? This is just the perks of it, Miss Clark. You stand a chance to gain a lot more. I bit my lips, thinking of the things that sort of money could do for my family. I shouldn't even be considering this, but on the other hand, the money will go a long way in solving a lot. Chapter 3. Amelia. We are currently seating in small private conference room waiting for Mrs. Gray's lawyer to show up. I never characterized Mrs. Gray as someone who could wait for anyone. Clearly this was important to her. The door slams open and a lady rushes in a black-white dress. I'm sorry for the delay, Mrs. Gray, she says as she takes off her bag and sits beside me. Mrs. Gray simply nods, understanding. She turned her face to me. You must be Amelia Clark, she said, reaching her hand to me. I took her hand. Yes, nice to meet you, she supplied. Helen Wilson. Helen Wilson, I repeated. Let's begin. The contract, she says as she reached out for some files in her bag and places them on the table. Do I need to explain what this arrangement is about, Ms. Clark? The lawyer asked, and I shook my head vigorously. Very well then, according to the contract prior to signing, you've willingly submitted to a health test. You are as well to provide an accurate and genuine previous medical records and any unknown family hereditary illness. She says and paused. I nodded, understanding. You are very well entitled to a sum of $20,000 monthly allowance, which is exclusive to your final payment, which is the sum of $500,000. I almost choked on my saliva. Are you okay? I nodded and cleared my dry throat, motioning for her to continue. Do you have any objections or any more demands you would like to add? The lawyer asked. What else could I possibly ask for? With all these money, I could become the next big thing in America. I turned my eyes swiftly to Mrs. Gray. Her eyes were glued to her phone. Helen cleared her throat and continued, prior to the contract to be signed, you will be placed under the residence and care of the Grays. In simple words, you will be living with the Grays throughout the period of your pregnancy. She said and leaned back against her chair, probably waiting for my reaction. Wait? What? No one told me about that? I barked, turning my eyes to Mrs. Gray, waiting for an explanation. She lifted her piercing eyes up to me. I don't want the media or anyone finding out about this arrangement, and the Gray residence is the safest place for you and the baby. I am not comfortable with staying away from my family. This is ridiculous. I am not concerned with your comfortability, Miss Clark. I'm interested in the comfort of my grandchild, which is the sole reason we are here. I'm going to be the supposed baby's mother. I have a right. She cuts me off. You're the surrogate, Miss Clark. You have no rights. She grits. I suggest you walk away now, if this would be a problem for you. I looked away. I shouldn't be surprised. The Grays are rumored to be a very cunning and manipulative family. I nodded. Moving on, prior to the contract to be signed, after the birth of the supposed child, you're not to make eye contact with the baby. In simple words, you are not allowed to see the supposed child after delivery. I stared in disbelief. How am I to go through all that pain and not have any connection with my baby? You are the surrogate, Miss Clark, Mrs. Gray said in a high-pitched voice. I sucked in. That being cleared, let's get back to the contract, Helen said, trying to retain back the decorum of the room. I nodded, motioning her to continue. Prior to the contract to be signed, after the delivery of the child, you are entitled to the full payment, and thereafter you are to transfer all the rights over the supposed child to the Grays and never to make any form of contact with child. She paused and flips the page, continuing, prior to the contract to be signed, Miss Clark, you've the right to walk away if you're no longer comfortable with the contract. But immediately after your insemination and the eggs are fertilized, that right will be terminated, and the Grays are entitled to sue for any breach of contract if you attempt to run, abort, or lay motherly claim to the child. I nod. You're entitled to a proper dieting and proper housing suitable. Chapter 4. A week later. Amelia. I lay on a bed with my legs open as the doctor inserted some sticks inside of me. Mrs. Gray was standing next to me but left a minute ago to answer an important call. Stay still, Miss Clark, the doctor warned, almost making me want to bark at her. How the hell does she expect me to stay still while she sticks this shit inside of me? My palms are sweating excessively. I can barely breathe or think properly. Maybe this a sign that I shouldn't be doing this. My heart began to pant heavily. Amelia. The doctor calls in worry. I need air. I let out breathlessly. Calm down, Amelia, take a deep breath, she said. I nodded and sucked in a deep breath, letting it all out slowly. It's okay to be nervous, the doctor explained. Just take your time. We will start when you're ready, she says with a smile. I nodded and laid back down, ready to get it over with it. I take another deep breath and centered my eyes on the ceiling. You can do this, Amelia. It's not like you have a choice. Do it for Jason and Mom. Are you ready? The doctor asked. I closed my eyes and nodded. I shut my eyes tightly as I began to feel a slight discomfort down there. It didn't hurt or anything, it just felt cold. I began taking my mind to all the reasons why I am doing this, just to pass time. After what felt like forever, I felt the doctor covering me up and pulling away. It's over. she said, and I opened my eyes. You've to be really careful these few days, she said as I tried to sit up straight on the bed. Am I pregnant? I asked and realized how stupid that sounded. She chuckled. No dear, it would take 2 to 3 weeks before we can be certain. There's 50-50 chance this might work, so don't be alarmed if it doesn't. I nodded, understanding. That will be all. Remember to take it easy for these few days, she said with a smile before walking out the door. As soon she left, the door swings open and Mrs. Gray walks in. How are you feeling? She asked, and it almost seemed like she cared for a second. I tried sitting up and she rushes and helps me. The doctor recommended you lay down for a few hours, she said. I nodded, laying back again and turning my head to the other side of the bed. I covered my mouth with my hand as I began to sob silently. Thank you, Amelia, Mrs. Gray's voice echoed, making me turn to her in disbelief. Did I hear wrong? She moved closer and sat at the edge of the bed. Thank you, she repeated, and between my shocked expression I managed to nod. It's probably the meds messing with me now, but she actually sounded human. Definitely the meds, I concluded. I should lay down and shut my eyes for a while to get my sanity together. I closed my eyes. Damien wants to meet you, she said, and I fluttered them open immediately. He got really furious when he found about the surrogacy and asked to see you. My eyes widened. He didn't know? If he knew, he would have done everything in his power to stop it, and Damien isn't exactly an easy person to convince. I ran my hand through my hair in frustration. This is wrong, I let out. This is all wrong, Amelia. Everything about this is wrong, and the fact you're doing it for money makes it all worse, my inner voice screamed from inside. I jumped off the bed. I can't do this anymore. I am sorry, Mrs. Gray. She laughed, an actual scary evil laugh that had me frightened for a second. It's adorable and satisfying how you think you still have a choice, she said, revealing her true evil self again. I ran my hand over my face. This isn't what I signed for, she chuckled. This exactly what you signed for, Miss Clark, for $500,000. She spat. So, this is how things are going to go. I will arrange for you two to meet next weekend, and you will do exactly as I tell you to do. Her evil eye pierced through mine. Is that clear? She asked. Under the fancy designer clothes and expensive jewelry was a cold and heartless woman willing to do anything to get what she wants. If I had to give her my baby, I need to be sure Damien isn't as